It's The Drive with Steve Jaxson, 1350 KSRO.
Let me read from a press release about a new book. Once in a while, a book comes along that moves its readers and stays with them long after they've turned the last page. Dean, I had it perfectly. I knew I was going to do this. I've been saying it correctly all day. Dimitrieski, his book Tears for My City, is an autobiography of a Detroit white boy, and it's one of those books, a powerful true story of a Macedonian boy whose family moves into Detroit's most dangerous neighborhoods when gang violence was at its peak in the 70s. Everyone's talking about it, what a rough time Detroit has now. It really kind of started in the 70s. Let me introduce to you the author of the book, Tears for My City. He is Dean...
Dimitrieski.
Thank you, man. I was saying it correct all day. I even got it phonetically
you
here.
Had it perfect. You had it perfect.
Dimitrieski. I also grew up in Detroit, and I love my hometown. I have a real connection to Detroit. I was last there about 4 years ago, and it was rough in many ways, but cool in other ways. Tell us your story. A Macedonian boy, you wound up in Detroit in the 70s.
In the 70s, my parents were looking for creating a better life for my sister and I, and they picked Detroit, mostly because of the auto market. They figured they can find jobs relatively easy. And at that time, Macedonia was a part of Yugoslavia, and to just escape out of Yugoslavia was not an easy task. I think they had to, go through several different routes. Our route we chose was Austria. We went to Austria. We lived there for 7-8 months until the paperwork came in, and then if you were the lucky ones, and depending on how you looked at luck, whether you were rejected as being lucky or you got actually the chance to come to Detroit as being the lucky ones, we were the chosen ones to make our way over to New York and then over to Detroit. Even the beginning wasn't easy. The entire move was as difficult as it can be. And this is from villagers. You know, my parents were villagers. They were not people that made these big changes, and they really were. They wanted to create this better life for my sister and I, and we ended up in one of the worst neighborhoods on record in the 70s and 80s. And that's the zip code of that area is 48211, and that's the area that I grew up in, and that's the east side.
Yeah.
It's probably the area that maybe you took a drive in last time you were here.
Oh, we did. I went everywhere. Yeah. Hey, I can't wait to read this. And by the way, you got to get your publisher to send me a copy.
Absolutely. It's already on its way.
Cool. Thank you. Your family's American dream from Macedonia and the grim reality that they found in the 70s in Detroit. Wow. So how old were you when you got to Detroit?
I was about 5 years old when we got into Detroit.
You really grew up there?
Yes, I definitely grew up there. And my first images when we drove in right off of McDougal, right on McDougal actually, gym shoes hanging off of a wire. And as a kid looking at that and not understanding what that was, and being concerned about some child lost their gym shoes, how are they going to get them back?
Little did you know.
Later on that I found out what that really meant, and Detroiters really started that. The gangs in Detroit started the shoe hanging incident when somebody lost their lives to the streets and they would throw the shoes up in remembrance of that person, usually a gang member, and we took a drive out there for the book to include some photos in the book, and that's what we saw right within the same area that I grew up in, on McDougal.
Now, I grew up, as I said, mostly in the suburbs, and it was 50s and 60s, so I was gone from Detroit by the early 70s. In the 50s and 60s, it was pretty idyllic. It was still a happening town.
Yes.
And things were fine. The 70s
Absolutely.
really was the beginning of the downfall for Detroit.
Yes.
And it wasn't as much economical as it was violence and the grim reality that you speak about in this book.
Exactly. The thing that we're known for is the Young Boys Incorporated. Nancy Reagan, started her campaign, Say No to Drugs, mostly because of what was going on in the streets of Detroit with kids in the fourth grade selling drugs. Every kid had a 22 or a 25 because it's a small pistol where they can actually put their hand around it if they needed to. And in one hand they had a gun, and the other hand they had cocaine. They were selling crack, basically.
Right.
And that's where they were. My elementary school is where a lot of the YBIs on the east side started, and I grew up with them from day one.
Now, were you a member of any of these gangs?
I never joined, and this was that fine line. It was hanging out with them, playing basketball, and again, it took me years to be accepted, just to be a part of that whole scene. There was a lot of just ass kickings. I mean, I got my butt kicked almost on a daily basis until one day in gym class, I started climbing this rope and I started gaining respect for that. So it was more on that level. A little bit by a time, they stopped messing with me basically. But I never joined the gang. My parents were really strict, and that was something that it was never going to happen. But I do talk about coming face to face with one of the biggest drug lords in the Detroit area, and I had my run-ins with them. They wanted me to join because, again, having a young kid and a white young kid on top of it in that area was a prized possession for the drug lords.
Exactly. You actually witnessed a murder, didn't you?
I did, and that's the part where we had to leave abruptly. There was no time to pack, and we had to leave. It was basically right after the court case, and without giving too much away, I had no choice but to tell exactly what happened in my testimony, put another person that was an up-and-comer in the drug world behind bars, and that was the change of everything. So the Tears for My City really comes from that. It's like, I finally got accepted after these many, many years of not being accepted, and then, it was all taken away from me at that moment when I became a witness to a very horrific murder. I mean, it was very well publicized. It happened right on my street, right across the street from my house. Just a very, very bad time. And we talk about the time on Devil's Night in 1984. We had 850 fires in our neighborhood.
I know. I remember. Oh man.
The city was on fire. I mean, no matter where you looked, you saw something on fire, whether it was a house, a car, a dumpster, whatever. Something was burning within a few feet from you.
Now, I got to explain to people, you may have heard about Devil's Night in Detroit. It started in the 50s, really, and I was born in 52, and then growing up in the 50s and then 60s, here's what we would do on Devil's Night. We would go and ring people's doorbells. Mm-hmm. We would soap windows and maybe TP a house. That was the extent of it. By the 70s, the Devil's Night turned into complete and utter mayhem. If you've probably read about it over the years, and as Dean was saying, 800 and some fires in neighborhoods the night before Halloween.
Yes. And
all we had was a bar of soap and some toilet paper. And we thought we were badass.
I know. That's exactly how it was.
Wow, man. But somehow you made it out. This isn't going to matter for anyone that didn't grow up in Detroit, but give me more of a direction on what neighborhoods and what streets we're talking about, which section of the east side.
We're talking, I know you're going to know this area, Shane Street.
Yep.
Okay, Shane, if you were to take Shane and go east about 3 to 4 blocks, you'll run into another major street in McDougal. Right. And I lived on McDougal between Kirby and Frederick.
I do know exactly where you're talking about.
Yeah, again, the zip code, you can look it up. It's pretty amazing on leading the country in basically everything negative for about 10 to 15 years in a row.
48211, right?
Yeah, 48211. Yeah. Not number 3, not number 2, but number 1.
Wow.
Yeah, and to come out of that, sometimes you do run away from problems. Most of the time you run away from problems that come around you because you never know what could happen. But eventually there comes a time where you're just too tired to run, figuratively, literally, and you stand up for yourself. And that's happened a lot of times. And just by sheer determination and sometimes sheer luck, you make it out of there. A lot of people didn't make it out of there. A lot of people are in jail. They're murdered. They're, if you were directly involved in the drugs, you're definitely not the same person, even if you did survive it.
Yeah,
because you, at some point, you've probably tried it. And I came out of there not ever even smoking a cigarette. I've never even tried a cigarette.
Wow.
Never tried any drugs, and I'm the complete opposite of what you would think about that time frame with that the dealing. And one person that is kind of a funny story in itself, if you can find some humor in it, one of the most notorious drug dealers of all time was my somewhat mentor that I talk about in the book, and he didn't want me anywhere near drugs. And we never talked about his dealings with it. It was just more or less me sticking with my sports, because he always thought I was going to be some type of sports figure in the future, and that never happened. And I kind of discussed some of the reasons on why that never happened. I had I think it could have happened. I think it probably should have happened, where I was involved with sports in some way, but that wasn't to be. But I was taking lessons from a person that was known to be, the biggest drug dealer in the city.
Dean Dimitrieski, he is the author of Tears for My City. It's all about growing up in a really, really tough neighborhood in the 70s in Detroit. You did good for yourself, though. You got your bachelor's degree from Wayne State. You went on and got a master's at Central Michigan, and you're pursuing a doctorate right now, right?
I am pursuing it. It's on hold right now. We had a little mishap. My father had a stroke a couple of years ago. So
I'm sorry.
It's spending some time just kind of getting him back into moving around a little bit more. But I'm going to jump into that again, and I like to get the international business doctorate.
And you live in you're still living in Michigan. What part?
Shelby Township.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
If you're familiar with the northeast suburb.
Right. Yeah.
Not too far from Detroit. You can still get to Detroit from my area, within 40 minutes or so, down 94.
Yeah, when I was growing up, we were just down, if you took Woodward Avenue all the way into the suburbs, man, and then you hit the Grosse Points. The fancy Grosse Points. Grosse Point Woods was more middle class than upper middle class, but
right.
Go Tigers, and
absolutely.
Unfortunately, the Red Wings aren't going to pull it this year, but hey, I'm excited about the Lions, and
we got a lot of good things going on.
Yeah, man. When I was there, it was so cool to see Comerica Park right smacked up against Ford Field and Hockey Town across the street. It was cool.
Yeah, it's a great scene. People that don't know, it's like it's amazing. We have a gem in that area. It's beautiful.
Yep, it really is.
Out.
Dean Dimitrieski, the book is Tears for My City, an autobiography of a Detroit white boy. I can't wait to read this, so I'm looking forward to getting the book. Also, is there one particular website for people to go to get the book and learn more?
Amazon seems to be the most popular place for it. There's a ton of reviews on Amazon if everybody wants to kind of get on there and see what it's about, a little bit more in detail on what other people think about it. But it's basically available on BarnesandNoble.com. It's on Kindle, Nook, iPad,
right.
iBooks, Apple, hardcover, paperback, ebook, you name it. It's covered.
Right.
Cool. I'm talking to Barnes & Noble next week about having it distributed across Barnes & Noble on a regional basis at first, and then kind of spreading out further. But the book, it's different these days. Amazon kind of takes care of a lot of it in itself.
Yeah.
The sales.
No, it makes it so much easier to write a book and get it out there. It's great. Yeah, I assume this is your first one. Your first book?
It's my first one. Yeah. It was a very difficult project because it's things that have happened, and I had a chance to sign on with a very large publisher. They wanted me to keep the real names in the book, especially 3 figures in particular, because of their popularity. And this goes beyond the Detroit area. People know about these 3 people across the country.
Right.
And I couldn't do that. I didn't feel safe doing that. I hid their identity. I kept the stories 100% accurate, with the exception of just changing a few of the names. And I didn't want to go with that publisher because of that pressure. And Bookstand Publishing was great to work with, and they allowed me the latitude to kind of create it my way, and that's exactly what I did.
Right on. Dean Dimitrieski, the book is Tears for My City, an autobiography of a Detroit white boy.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to you afterwards and see what you think, and this will be like you and I sitting on my porch, and I'm telling you all the stories, and you're going to identify with a lot of these people.
Yeah.
You'll know exactly who they are because you were from here, and I'm still a little worried. I still have that looking over my shoulder, mentality about, even though it's 25, 30 years later, I still have that worry about, some of these people still out there, and some of them are still out there. Not all of them are in jail or, gone.
Right.
Some of them are still out there. So I do have to be careful. I held off in the PR department, and the first PR that went out was last week, and it has created a tremendous amount of response so far. But I'm taking it slow, and I almost want to come to Detroit with it last. I want the country to kind of know about it first, and then we can focus in on Detroit afterwards.
Nice.
That's my strategy.
Dean Dimitrieski, again, thank you, man, and we'll stay in touch, and I'll get a hold of you after I read it, and we'll have you on again.
Absolutely. I look forward to it, Steve. Thanks a lot for your time, and I'll shoot you an email and let you know how things are going also.
All right, cool, man. Yeah, stay in touch. Dean, thank you so much.
Thanks. Take care.
All right, you too. Best of